All right. Hi, I'm Gene Gard. I'm skipper of Ship 63 here in Birmingham, Alabama, and for Sea Scouts, but really for all scouting, I wanted to talk a little bit today about the Morse code interpreter strip. So this is pretty cool. It's an interpreter strip. You can see just like all the other various languages out there, but not only is it cool, but it's also by orders of magnitude easier to get than any of these other uh, interpreter strips, because most of them involve, if you want to do Spanish, you actually have to have a 5 minute long conversation in Spanish with somebody. So it's pretty challenging, and with Morse code you do have to do that, but the speed is so slow that it's eminently doable for just about anybody. So we'll talk about that here a little bit. So Morse code is it's a really important thing throughout history, and it's actually still really important today. Originally, when there was just sort of a wire that would connect two things, which essentially is what a telegraph is, you could really have two different ways to indicate a signal. It's either on or off, plus or minus. Or in this case, I have my key here, my practice key. It's on or off, basically. And so rhythmically, they decided that there's really two different signals you'd make. One is a long and one is a short, which is enough to communicate very quickly and very effectively. And it's very useful due to its low bandwidth. And so what that means is, even today, for example, in amateur radio or military operations where you're trying to communicate over a very long distance, you can know this intuitively, that even if if you try to do voice, it might be garbled, or the signal might not be very strong, or it might require a lot of information. With Morse code either being on or off, it could get real garbled, or it could have a lot of other problems, and you'd still be able to hear it. And also, since it's just one continuous tone, it's not really probably beyond the scope of this discussion, but the bandwidth of it is much smaller. Whereas for things like voice, you need a lot of the spectrum, the frequency spectrum that's available. But for this, you just need a tiny little bit. And so the first communication over telegraph, which was by Morse code, was "What hath God wrought?" And I guess we're still figuring that out. So it's still very useful. It used to be required for amateur radio operators to get certain licensure, but it's not anymore. But it's still really cool. It's definitely still used by the military, and in fact used by aviation beacons. So if you're near an airport, for example, here in Birmingham, there's a beacon that sends out BHM over and over again, because that's the airport code here. Most famously, I think, on that note, is the Toronto airport. Its code is YYZ. All the airports in Canada start with Y, I think. And it has a very distinctive rhythmic signature when you say YYZ in Morse code. And Rush wrote a song about it. That's a Rush song called YYZ, and the rhythm of it is very syncopated, and it harkens back to that YYZ beacon, which is pretty cool. Again, for people, like Stephen Hawking towards the end of his life, when he had trouble really moving much else but like one muscle in his face, but also for other people with disabilities, sometimes even if they can't use, for example, sign language or communicate other ways, they still can, tap this kind of Morse code thing out. And it's still very useful in emergencies. Again, when all else fails, it's a way. Throughout history, it's been used a number of times to communicate in different adverse settings. And it's just cool, even just for nothing else other than the sort of the fun, amateur reasons you might use it. It's still something worth learning, in my opinion. And so you can see here, this is the requirements for the interpreter strip, and I'll be controversial here and say, if you were really motivated and you had some equipment and somebody to help you, you might be able to get to a point where you could achieve the interpreter strip for Morse code, certainly in less than a day, even potentially, maybe even just a few hours. And the reason is that the work you have to do, and I'll scroll down, I'll just kind of read through this. A 5 minute conversation in Morse code at a speed of at least 5 words per minute. Well, 5 times 5 is 25. So essentially, in the course of 5 minutes, for you and somebody else to send 25 words back and forth to each other is really not that challenging. And in fact, even if you don't really have all the different Morse code, codes, the shapes loaded up in your head, if you have a table in front of you and you're able to transcribe it, it's pretty doable. And again, the same thing, copying correctly a 2-minute message, sending Morse code at a minimum of 5 words per minute, that's basically receiving 10 words. And again, even if you can just differentiate the 3 things in Morse code, which are the longs, the shorts, which are known as das and dits, if you can tell the difference between a long and a short, and then between those there's pauses which separate the different letters, and then longer pauses that separate the words. If you can just write it down and then later look up what the letters actually mean, you can achieve that pretty well. And the last one is send a 25-word written message in 5 words per minute. So again, it's going to take you less than 5 minutes. The real issue, this is probably the hardest part, because it's just like any language. Once you start to develop some proficiency, you may be able to understand what people are saying, but when you actually try to, actually make the letters, it may be difficult for somebody to understand. So really the proper way to do this is to have the person that's sort of testing for the strip actually write, a 25-word message of their own, and then attempt to send it to whoever is sort of examining them. And the examiner hopefully will try as hard as they can to actually interpret it and read it correctly. But if they, can't figure it out, then you won't pass. But there's a good chance that if you're deliberate, you'll be able to figure it out. So again, these requirements do match those of other interpreter strips, but it's just much easier because, carrying on a conversation in a foreign language while you're speaking is very different than sending, a letter every few seconds. That's a lot easier. The equivalent would be if you only had to, have 25 words exchanged with somebody in 5 minutes, you probably could have the Spanish-English dictionary handy and, sort of be able to figure it out real time. But that doesn't really meet the spirit of the other interpreter strips, but it certainly meets the spirit here. And this is the patch, which, as you guessed, spells out Morse. So one thing to look up if you're actually serious about this is the Farnsworth method. There's real specific rules about the relative lengths of the longs and the shorts and the spaces between them. But the Farnsworth method basically says, as you're learning, you should do the letters you should do the dits and the das within the letters really quickly. But it's okay to have bigger pauses between the letters and then between the words. So, and the reason is, if you were going to do it really slowly, you totally lose the plot when you're listening to it. So for example, if I was going to send, something like this, you can hear if I was going like this, you see, you just kind of lose track of it and get distracted. So the idea would be, so for example, if I was sending the word Morse like this, I would send 2 longs for an M, and you can wait a while and then so I spelled that out, and I did the letters relatively quickly, but put a fair amount of space between the letters, more than normally would be acceptable. So that's kind of what this is about, and that's probably a pretty valid way to learn it. So yeah, so you can see here it's mostly I guess anywhere from 1 to 3 or I'm sorry, 1 to 4 dits or das long. The ones that are 5 dits or das long are the numbers, and then there's a few other punctuations that are used, and that's international Morse code. And then there's variations where there's all kinds of different special characters and things, but as far as the actual official international Morse code, there's only a certain few things in there. So I don't know why I have a tiny bullet point there, but there's really several different resources I wanted to point you to if you're interested in doing this. One is, this little setup I have here is pretty cool, and you can get an app on your phone. You don't need to buy anything. You can get an app on your phone that will train you on things, and also will allow you to code the Morse code yourself from right in your phone by tapping on your phone. But there's just something to be said, I think, about you know, actual physical devices. So, you know, it's really just three pieces here. What I have, the first one is the signal device, which you can see is really just a little chip that a normal audio jack plugs into. Of course, audio jacks are pretty unusual these days. Now it's all USB-C, but this is just like a normal, whatever, 12mm audio jack. It's got a you know, a coin battery, like a 2032 battery on the back. I think I got this on AliExpress. You can find them on eBay. You know, there's a lot of different places you can get them. Amazon, and some of them actually use USB power to drive them. I got the one with the battery. It just seems to work the best. But the one I have, I've gotten several times because it tends to break. But it has that letter, those letters BH8DZE on it. So if you're trying to, you know, look it up, you might be able to find it that way. But really, anything that beeps is good. And this is the key I got from CW Morse. And so this is, I think, the micro or the mini straight key, and I think it's got they call it the navel knob on it or something like that. But it really, the one thing that they do highly recommend when you're learning is to use what's called a straight key, because there are specialized ones where, you know, this is just a button that completes a circuit, so you know, you can hold it for long or not long. But there's some that, you know, they call them speed keys or something like that, where if you twist it one way, it does a dit, and if you twist it the other way, it does a da. And it's fine to use those eventually, but when you're learning, it's highly recommended to learn on a straight key, because you can always go to a speed key from a straight key, but it's very hard to figure out, you know. It's kind of like, it's hard to explain, like a motorcycle versus a bicycle or something, but you definitely would want to learn on the straight key. And the one I like, this is one from CW Morse, which I like. I mean, there's any number of them. There's historical ones you can get. But this is just a good setup, and then there's just an audio cable. As far as resources to help you learn, if you're interested in really getting into it, there's really two that I like. Let's see. Here we go. I was trying to find where I had my screen. The first is this guy, Kurt Zogelman. I don't even know who this guy is. I don't know. You know, he's obviously, I'm not sponsoring him, and he's not paying me to say any of this, but the way you find him is if you start looking up different practice things. You know, if you're trying to practice things at a certain speed, like 15 words per minute, or you can see, you know, he's got all kinds of different things here. It's always distinctive because it has the drawing of the guy with the visor on, and I just find his videos to be especially useful. And so that's one resource I think is great. And the other one is, if you would rather have people help you, there's this organization called the Long Island CW Club, which was, I guess, originally a local organization, but they've kind of become the standard bearer for CW, stands for continuous wave. That's just another word for Morse code. But they've really become the sort of global standard bearers for this. And they have a system that you use where you start with certain letters, and then you add other letters on as you go. And there's you know, videos and things they have, but there's online classes where you get online with other people in a Zoom room, and there's multiple ones throughout the day. You know, there's different ones. You know, there's some for just women. I mean, there's all kinds of different subgroups of people they do. But if you'd rather learn with somebody else, but you don't have anybody handy, this is really a great organization. And it's, I mean, I think they charge maybe $30 a year or something. But it's really, you know, again, I mean, there's hundreds of classes a month. It's a pretty cool operation, and it's a great way to learn if that appeals to you. Because the issue is, it's just like speaking a language. If you start practicing it, you may be practicing it wrong, and you may be doing it in a way other people wouldn't understand. So there's really a lot of value of having somebody to listen and copy what you're saying and kind of participate with you. So those are the big resources I identified, and I'll leave you with this. So it's So I think you understood that, and I appreciate you watching, and go get your Morse code interpreter strip. It's fun and easy.